I made no secret in regards to my position on a hypothetical independent Scotland. I'm not a unionist, nothing against English people, I just have no time for Westminster, nor the Royals. But the idea of independence that's been spoken about in recent times by the socialists who pretend to be nationalists, it's not independence to be part of the European Union, regardless of how many times they try to tell you otherwise. But a common theme has emerged in recent times in my direction, and it's accusations of me being a covert Tory and or a unionist. And even if that was the case, these people who think they've got one over on me have no leg to stand on when they start to white knight for the cringy SNP. When they come away with the tropes that were once coined in Hollywood, such as getting on with the day job. When I used to hear that bollocks, I used to put that down to being brainwashed. Now I put that down to being completely and utterly misinformed about the party that you claim to support. As I pointed out on many occasions, the SNP have not done a damn thing since they took over office that hasn't had a UN rubber stamp on it of sorts. Even things as mundane as a smacking ban. Everything they've done, from the overhaul of the education to pressing on ahead with their named person bollocks despite the public disagreeing fundamentally, they were quite prepared to stare at all that backlash in the face. And for what? It wasn't even their own policy. Independence should be the last thing on people's fucking minds right now, when there is something working its way in the background, not just here, but across the majority of the world. But it seems that children deprived of human rights every day in Scotland. More than 50 children's charities and experts contribute to the report for Together, the Scottish Alliance for Children's Rights, which considers the extent to which children in Scotland are able to exercise their human rights set out in the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child. And, surprise, surprise, the report has called for urgent action to ensure that the incorporation of the UNCRC, aka indoctrination, into Scots law is accompanied by real change. So it's not enough that it's going to be implemented, real change needs to occur. And what for? So children and young people can experience their rights. It drives me wild with excitement. I can't contain myself. You know, I still fit in the category of a young person, technically, so I get to experience my rights in full. Thank God for the UN. Just a couple examples of some of the rights relating to children. Article 29. I have the right to an education which develops my personality, respect for others and the environment. But the development of respect for the child's parents, his or her own cultural identity, language values, for the national values of the country in which the child is living, the country from which he or she may originate, and for civilization, different from his or her own. And then it says the preparation of the child for a responsible life in a free society in the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of the sexes, friendship among all peoples, ethnic, national, religious groups and persons of indigenous origin, which in the case of Scotland should be referring to Scottish children, but of course not, because we don't exist, do we, for a plethora of reasons. But of course, the redefining of Indigenous for one, but second of all, anybody could be Scottish apparently, according to Nicola Finlips, or should I say the UN. For example, is Article 17, which states that children and young people should be able to access information, particularly from the media. They should be able to get information from many places. Oh, that's great, it's nice. Mass media to disseminate information and material of social and cultural benefit to the child. Encourage international cooperation in the production, exchange and dissemination of information. Encourage children's books and dissemination of. Encourage the mass media to have a particular regard to the linguistic needs of children who belong to the minority groups or who are Indigenous. Scottish children? No, of course not. So again, pandering to minorities and Indigenous children or people in general. Nothing new there. This is of course the same organisation that's responsible for a good portion of the bollocks relating to white people creating race so they could run around the world and pretend that they were white. You know, anti-racism, etc. So that leads me to this. State of Children's Rights in Scotland. 210 pages long, so I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to be able to cut this down to size. It might be one long video, it may not be. But the point remains the same, referring back to what I said at the very beginning. When people talk about getting on with their job, they have no fucking idea what they're talking about. They have no idea. There's no smoke without fire. Didn't take long for the Sustainable Development Goals to get a mention. So it says the UK is also a signatory to 6 other UN human rights treaties, including the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights, Social, Cultural and Economic Rights, as well as conventions against torture, racial discrimination, anti-racism, discrimination against women, there's your feminism, and the rights of persons with disabilities. Approximately every 6 years, the government submits reports to the relevant UN treaty body on its implementation of each treaty, with reports addressing both reserved and devolved matters, including contributions from the Rainbow Unicorn governments, and considering evidence from a range of sources, including a verbal examination of representatives from the UK. The committee issues sets of recommendations as to how the UK and devolved governments can make progress in implementing the particular treaty. And this is why I believe we have a devolved government. Fuck all to do with Scotland branching out for pastures new. It's so that Westminster didn't have to waste their time with this garbage. They can focus on doing this to England. Sturgeon can focus on doing it here. Finlips, or her advisory group on human rights leadership, one of many advisory groups that she has set up, was established to make recommendations, totally organic and independently, on how Scotland can lead by example, unironically. Together welcomed the advisory group's recommendations for a new act of the Scottish Parliament to enshrine economic, social, culture and environmental rights into domestic law, which would provide an opportunity to enshrine wider protections for children and other international human rights treaties and complement UNCRC incorporation. Getting on with the day job, aye. Children and Young People Act places a duty on the Rainbow Unicorn government to report every 3 years in its actions to progress children's rights. Oh, that's so cute. The use of children's rights and well-being at national level has been strongly welcomed by Together, who recognise the role they play in ensuring children's rights are adequately reflected in policy development. The government is committed to undertake an evaluation to further support and promote its use. To date, the Children and Young People's Commissioner for Scotland has compared one formal investigation on the use of restraint and seclusion in schools. There is ongoing investigations into securing accommodation, local authority compliance, yada yada. And still don't have full legal protection from age discrimination. With a number of provisions under the Equality Act 2010 exempting children, concerns are raised that the additional equalities protections under the EU's Charter of Fundamental Rights will be lost upon the UK leaving the EU. Negative attitudes, stigma and discrimination continue to impact on the lives of vulnerable groups and vulnerable groups alone of children, including disabled, but not limited to, minority ethnic, gypsy and traveller, migrant, asylum seekers, refugees, care experience and LGBT children, leaving of course simply heterosexual boys and girls. The UN Committee has highlighted the need for strengthened awareness raising and other preventative activities against discrimination and stigmatisation. I mean, just fuck off. The UN Committee noted the extension of the voting age in Scotland to 16 and 17 in local Parliament elections. By contrast, 16 and 17-year-olds remain unable to do so in the UK elections, European elections and UK-wide referendums. What does that tell you? This has resulted in confusion and an on-off relationship with democratic engagement. Oh, my heart bleeds. Children will live with the effects of leaving the EU the longest. I mean, come on. Really? Yet many felt that their voices were not heard in the run-up to the referendum, or in the resulting negotiations. Ah yes, let's get the input of children. What possible benefit could come from that? Well, I suppose if they are all tuned up in the bullshit that they are being taught in schools, then I suppose it could work out nicely. But if you're going to go down that route, then surely if we get the advice and opinions of a 10-year-old, we should be taking into consideration his 5-year-old sister, no? Areas of good practice have been some progress in relation to the promotion and implementation of children's participation at the national level through a combination of legislative and policy developments. Areas of good practice have been identified, including the government's involvement of the Scottish Youth Parliament and Children's Parliament in consultations. Unfortunately, children's rights organisations and representative youth bodies have reported that some effects can be tokenistic. More needs to be done to ensure the government's strategic approach to participation is grounded in rights-based approaches, challenging barriers that currently impede children's right to be heard. I mean, come on, man. Yeah. UN also raised concerns about the regression of asylum seeking and refugee children's rights in several areas. Concerns were raised, including those around age assessments, detention of children, access to services and asylum supports. Those echo issues raised by a number of Together's members. In 2016, the committee raised concerns that the age of criminal responsibility continued to be 8 years old in Rainbow Unicorn land. So it's been raised to 12, However, this remains below the international acceptable minimum of 14 years old, as highlighted by the UN, and of course the UN's word is gospel. Raising the minimum age to 12, however, can be seen as a starting point on a journey to remove all children from the criminal justice system. Together's members remain concerned that Scots law does not ensure an entirely consistent definition of a child as being under 18 years old, particularly in areas of child justice. The UN Committee welcomed a number of positive steps taken to tackle trafficking, including the introduction of the Human Trafficking Act 2015. Together's members remain concerned by the system for identifying victims. Issues include that official decisions often conflict with those of specialists, that the process is not child-centred, the child's consent is not required, and a long time for decisions to be made. The UN also raised concerns that the minimum age for voluntary recruitment to the armed forces remained at 16, and that child recruits made up to 20% of recent intake, further raising concerns that children who come from vulnerable groups are disproportionately represented among recruits. These concerns continue in 2019, with Together members providing evidence highlighting specific issues around recruitment practices, informed consent and length of service. We have included recommendations made by other international human rights treaty bodies. Through the Universal Periodic Review and targets from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are particular relevance for children's rights. Of course they are. How convenient. They're particular relevance to children's rights. No surprises there. As a result, this is a landmark report. Oh yes. Throughout the report, we identify steps that have been taken to implement the UN's Committee 2016 recommendations and where further work is needed ahead of the UK's review. We recognise the challenges in taking some of the recommendations forward, although the government has legislative responsibility over devolved matters such as education, health and the justice system. Reserved decisions made by the UK government, issues such as welfare, immigration and employment can have a profound effect on breaching Abdul's rights, no letting them in. Furthermore, the UK-wide decision to withdraw from the EU will have a significant implication for children, or implications, especially the most vulnerable, who are continued to be affected by the impact of austerity on public services that the SNP have done fuck all to mitigate. As the UN Committee recognised in its examination of the UK, real progress, quote-unquote, has been made to improve the realisation of children's rights across Scotland. That's debatable, depending on how you define that, I suppose. In December 2018, the government published Progressing the Human Rights of Children in Scotland, a report 2015 to 2018, totally organic, thought of that all by themselves they did, which set out the progress made in relation to children's rights since 2015. The report was broadly welcomed by Together's members, of course it was. Although many have called for more assessment as to where children's rights have been realised or progressed, quote unquote, and how this has impacted on children's lives, I'm sure they are beside themselves. I'm sure they are. Public bodies are due to publish their first progress reports as required by the 2014 Act in 2020. In partnership with CYPS, or whatever, Together established an Incorporation Expert Advisory Group in autumn 2018, totally independent, I bet. This is comprised of international and Scottish experts, quote unquote, with extensive academic and practical knowledge of the UNCRC incorporations, so in other words, fellow activists, yes, communists essentially. The group drafted a children's rights bill to demonstrate the most effective model through which Scotland could incorporate the UNCRC into law. Alongside Nikikio Tanai, a member of the UN Committee, the Incorporation Expert Advisory Group presented the bill to the Deputy First Minister on Universal Children's Day 2018, with the draft including rights relating to drawing down the preamble, Articles 1 to 42 of the UNCRC, a duty to act compatibly, which follows the Human Rights Act model, meaning that states must comply with the UNCRC and may be held accountable in law for breaches of children's rights if they don't. A duty to have due regard to the UNCRC, which follows the Welsh measure, meaning the state must actively think about how to give effect to children's human rights when making policy decisions. In this way, the bill provides a model of full and direct incorporation, making it clear that all articles of the UNCRC and protocols should be part of our law. State parties are required to implement the CRC as a whole in recognition of the status of children as rights holders and in light of the indivisible and interdependent nature of CRC provisions. Thin Lips, of course, in April 2019, doing thy bidding, committed to pass a law within the next 2 years incorporating this shit into law. And this commitment has been widely welcomed, I bet it was. Throughout the consultation, the draft bill was strongly supported by the majority of attendees at Together's consultation events, with 36 member organisations in full. Together wrote to the Minister for Children and Young People to set out what a gold standard model of incorporation should include. This letter was clear that insofar as the powers of the Rainbow Unicorn Parliament allow, the bill should incorporate full and direct incorporation of the UNCRC and its protocols into law, include a duty on public authorities to comply with the UNCRC, ensure the UNCRC is accorded high priority in domestic legal system, particularly when in conflict with domestic legislation. It went on to say that the draft Children's Rights Bill addresses these issues in a way we believe is practical and deliverable. We recognise the importance and impact that a rights-based culture can have on the experiences and outcomes for children. A rights-based culture. Sounds great. In addition to legal protections and mechanisms for remedy and redress, there needs to be a holistic approach to incorporating and implementing children's human rights so that children grow up in an atmosphere of happiness, love and understanding. And you mean to tell? For government included a strong commitment. The bill to incorporate the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child will be the key bill in the final year of the Parliament and will be passed before the next election. This was followed by a statement by the Deputy First Minister on Universal Children's Day that the UNCRC will be incorporated into law in full and directly, of course. The Deputy Minister stated that the bill will enable the incorporation of provisions relating to reserved matters if the powers of the Parliament change in the future. Whilst this means the government bill will not directly reflect the draft of the Children's Rights Bill, drafted by the so-called experts, it has clearly been strongly informed by provisions of the draft bill and is expected to meet the gold standard. I bet it will. Incorporation of wider international human rights treaties. Following a commitment in the programme for government, Thin Lips and her little advisory group on human rights leadership was established to make recommendations on Scotland and how it can lead by example and ironically in the field of human rights, including economic, social, cultural and environmental rights. Operating independently apparently, but it just so happens to come away with recommendations that are akin to the people demanding that Sturgeon created it in the first place. Fuck off, man. The advisory group was supported by a reference group of around 50 civil society organisations, all of whom are in the same field. So what difference does that make? A public participatory process is a vital part of the preparation of the Act. Capacity building to enable effective implementation to improve people's lives. A Scottish Government's national mechanism for monitoring, reporting and implementation of human rights. What does that mean, I wonder? Development of human rights indicators for the National Performance Framework, process of implementation of recommendations led by a task force, of course, integration of any further devolved powers into the framework as proposed, and if independence, a written constitution including a Bill of Rights for Scotland. So an independent Scotland will incorporate everything the UN demands of us. That's great to know. The creation of a statutory human rights framework for Scotland will provide a subsequent opportunity to enshrine wider protection for children embedded in other human rights treaties such as the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. This in itself emphasises the importance of these broader human rights instruments to children. Particularly welcome the recommendation of the Scottish Parliament to enshrine economic, social and cultural environmental rights into Scottish domestic laws. Such an act would complement the incorporation of the UNCRC. The advisory group recognised the significant progress made towards UNCRC incorporation and was clear it should be seen as a separate process. The National Task Force leadership was set up in October of 2019 to consider the recommendations. The task force includes members from across the public sector and civil society and is co-chaired by the Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and Older People and Professor Alan Miller, the former chair of the First Minister's Advisory Group on Human Rights Leadership. I thought they were independent. What's going on here? The task force will develop the new human rights framework for Scotland and explore ways in which public participation in the process can be increased. And of course, when they're referring to the Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and Older People, is that not that woman who will not shut her fat mouth about feminism and why it's so desperately required in this day and age in this country? She is insufferable. A fucking plague on that Parliament, if ever I heard one. I know, I'm not sorry for that. 16, the government pledged to establish the National Advisory Council on Women and Girls. Yes, you know, the same cretins that are responsible for this council on their Twitter page. As of last week, in Scotland there are no female MSPs or Scottish MPs of visible minority ethnicities. Yes, that's right, and the tweet that accompanied this shit basically implied that racism was prevalent in Scotland because there was not a brown woman in Parliament. So what's the solution? Well, of course, it's just going to be positive discrimination. What's new there? It's the same shit that they did for women in general, because they were so oppressed and hard done by before Mama Sturgeon came to be. You know, the white man bad routine. What's new? It's a patriarchy after all. That's why we have the UN. Anyway, which was helped to drive forward action to tackle non-existent gender inequality. Disparities do not indicate gender inequality. They don't like the idea of women growing up to be themselves and potentially having children. They don't like that. It was established in 2017 and made up of 16 women and girls. That's great to know. Bringing a wide range of life experiences because they're so fucking oppressed. Supported by a wide group of experts and stakeholders. I'm sure Sturgeon consulted with them all. With over 530 members keen to make progress in gender equality. You mean just continuously pushing more and more of your far left feminist ideology into every possible sphere in Scotland. It's ridiculous, and I don't even personally believe that half of them believe the shit they're saying. It's just an excuse. In 2018, it launched its first report and recommendations, including a recommendation to incorporate CEDAW into Scots law, with the recommendation being accepted by Thin Lips, of course, who committed to ask the National Task Force for Human Rights Leadership to take it forward as part of the broader agenda for international human rights, because even that, she's such a brave, ardent, passionate feminist, apparently, and one does have to wonder if her so-called feminism comes from the UN or if that's itself organic. I don't know. Recommendations included the government should publish the proposed bill to incorporate UNCRC into Scots law as soon as possible. And they're not going fast enough, hence the report. The government and UK government alike should take measures to bring legislation in line with the UNCRC because they are the be-all and end-all. We should all aspire to be like the big wits at the UN for systemically reviewing existing legislation. Furthermore, the UK should follow Scottish government's right. Take the initiative and follow Nicola Sturgeon and her entourage. Yes, that's right. A real embodiment for a country that we should all aspire to be, I'm sure. Of what the UK has to say about the matter. In Scotland, ensure the full implementation of the action plan, Do the Right Thing, and a National Action Plan for Human Rights. In doing so, the committee recommends that the State Party allocate sufficient human, technical and financial resources, set up clear timelines, as well as monitor and evaluate framework for the implementation of the strategy and the action plans, and pay special attention to children belonging to the most vulnerable groups, which is every single group bar white boys. A range of Together's members strongly advocate for an action plan to accompany the reporting requirements. You know, not only that, if they're not talking about children from deprived areas being less likely to succeed in school because poverty somehow indicates retardation, they do the same thing with their identity politics shite. Oh, this child's brown. He must be marginalised and victimised. Let's pander and give him a helping hand. I mean, fuck off. You people are the pinnacle of regression. But yet you love to talk a good game about how inclusive and diverse your pandering shit really is. Anyway, the action plan has broadly been welcomed by members. Of course, what a shock. Many of whom are active contributors to several of the work strands included within. Well, there you go then. It is pivotal in ensuring children are recognised and treated as full rights holders. Oh, what is this? 4 strategic actions included in the action plan. How could I miss this? The riveting elements. The development of a participation framework for children and young people with the delivery of a 3-year children's rights awareness programme. Oh, that will be so exciting. Progress in the children's rights audit, assessing the most effective and practical ways to further embed the principles of the UNCRC into Scotland. Evaluation of children's rights and well-being, impact assessment. I mean, seriously, why would people, the big wits at the UN and whatnot, not the people that you see if ever you watch a live stream of the UN, but the people that are behind the scenes, why would they give the slightest shit about children around the world when they never have done prior? They don't give a fuck. They worked with Together, students from the University of Edinburgh conducted a project to explore the role of CRWIA in improving rights-based decision making, because it's all about those rights. found that an advocate for the use of the Children's Rights Impact Assessment, on all national legislation and policies that impact children. Scotland is at the forefront of international efforts to mainstream the use of children's rights impacts. Of course, getting on with a fucking day job, bye. It's about all they're good for. Running around to their little podiums to self-aggrandise about how progressive and inclusive they are. All they do all day long is this shit. And they have the audacity to then come out after the fact and compare how better off we are in comparison to England, considering the fact that England is a lot bigger in terms of population, considering the fact that England has a real big issue going on just now with demographics. Thin Lips stands up here with her little rainbow unicorn delegates, brags about how wonderful and enriching migrants are when she barely has any. And on top of that, loves to say that our NHS, for example, or our justice system, whatever it may be, well, it's better than England's. Well, that's great. That's a sigh of fucking relief. However, there was still much to do in terms of ensuring the support for the use of the or whatever it translates into rights-based decision-making. Analysis of the governments prior to February 2019 revealed a lack of consistency in our approach. Oh, that's not good, Sturgeon. You're going to get a fucking pay doc for that one. The students concluded that the government has the tools to produce exemplary CRWIAs, and that is consistency and refinement as opposed to reform that is key, of course. They came up with that all by themselves, I bet they did. A continuous cycle of impact assessments and evaluations mapping on the different groups of children impacted by a decision. Recognition of the indivisibility of UNCRC rights beyond just the general principles. A focus on participation of children's rights, which requires feedback on their involvement. And the use of CRWIA at national level has been strongly welcomed by members who recognise the role they play in ensuring children's rights are adequately reflected in policy development. It's important to ensure that in future years, regardless of the level of political commitment to children's rights, there continues to be an adequate consideration of children's rights in policy development. As such, Together has called for a provision to be included in the bill that would make it mandatory as part of the children's scheme, as the calls have been echoed across Together's membership, of course, and broader public authorities. Never by the public, you notice though, all by the activists behind the scenes. This should be accompanied by widespread training to ensure that the people in question see the world exactly like we see it. Widespread training, these fucking people. I will leave in this because this video is beginning to get too long, and if anybody wishes me to make a follow-up to this, then if you got it this far into the video, I don't know if you will have, but if you have, fair play, just let me know. I feel strongly that they need to learn more about the UNCRC and how it affects their lives, and I'm sure you're going to tell them all the wonderful things that this will encompass. Raising awareness and understanding of children's rights changes how children's rights are perceived and applied in society. Oh, I'm sure they are. Builds the capacity of children as rights, claim their rights, and increase the capacity of duty bearers to fulfill their obligations. Oh yeah. Comes of a child, for example, say, do we have to respect their decision even if they're 5 years old? Sure. Builds the capacity of children as rights holders to claim their rights and increase the capacity of duty bearers to fulfill their obligations. Oh yeah. Because when children are demand action immediately on climate change, well, we already know the score on that one. But what happens if a child, for example, says that they're a tranny? Do we have to respect their decision even if they're 5 years old purely because it's our human right? I mean, I'm intrigued to see how far they're going to go with this, because as far as I'm concerned, this makes no sense. I could understand if we were living in the 17th century, but the last time I checked, this is irrelevant. It's pointless. Too little, too late, as far as I'm concerned. But of course, it's not as they like to make it out to be. There is a nefarious intention behind it all, because this is one prong of a very large fucking virus, or cancer even. Children's involvements in their school and local community where their opinions and decisions can be properly acknowledged and taken into account. Oh yes, achieved through programs such as the Rights Respecting Schools Award, which has impacted on reducing bullying in primary schools in some local authorities. Bullying cannot be stopped permanently, and if you even try to go down the route of implying that you can stop bullying with this shit, you're lying. Bullying has gone on since the dawn of time. Adults participate in bullying. It happens for a multitude of different reasons. You ain't gonna fucking stop it by incorporating this shit. This is evidenced through a program, I've read that, sorry. Supporting positive attitudes towards diversity. Yes, that's right. Brainwashing children to accept diversity reduces bullying. You heard it here, you heard it here first, folks, sorry. Fuck off, man. If we can raise awareness and understanding of children's rights, we can significantly contribute to existing government efforts, or they could, to implement the UNCRC and other international human rights treaties. For example, in terms of the government's commitment to tackle the attainment gap. How's that working out for you? Research has showed that schools in areas of deprivation score higher than expected in attainment when there is evidence that the school addresses pupil participation. Because guess what? Being in poverty does not, by default, mean they're thick. The Children and Young People Act places a duty on ministers to promote public awareness and understanding of the UNCRC. Well, they're not doing a very good job of that one, I can assure you of that. Getting on with the day job. Oh, Sturgeon's such a brave, marvellous woman. Yes, independence, in name only. While they sit there and cry about the nasty words that Boris Johnson may or may not say to them behind closed doors. This shit's going on in the background. Nobody has the slightest clue. Scottish Government's 2018 Year of Young People was an international first. Oh, what a shock that is. The government also committed to host a cabinet meeting with children and to make this an annual event to ensure their voices are taken into account. Oh yes, leave it a few months obviously to allow for the brainwashing to continue. Primary 1 onwards, and are learning about climate change, and lo and behold, what was one of the things they asked for? Action to be taken on climate change. Coincided nicely with the pre-planned marches with Big Boy Greta. The whole thing's a scam. But anyway, this video is starting to get far too long, and I'm only on like page 20, so I can quite easily go on ahead and make a follow-up if people are interested. Just let me know. And on that note, peace.